everyone. Hi, Howard. How are you
Hey,
today?
Pam, how are you doing?
I'm doing really, really well. And I'm so glad to have you with me today because I have a question for you.
Okay, I'm game.
Okay. So I find it very simple to identify areas that don't have caries. I find it pretty simple to identify areas that have caries and need a restoration. That seems pretty obvious to me. But there's always that whole spectrum of gray where is it caries? Is it a stain? Should I maybe consider a physiotomy? Should I seal it? Should I leave it alone? What do you do for those question mark type pits and fissures?
Well, I basically flip a coin. Heads, I do. No, I don't. I really do explore it. And fortunately, there are a lot of different kinds of devices on the market that will help us, from the simplest transillumination, which is good on interproximal lesions. But when it comes to occlusal lesions, very often, just what you said, we'll see a little stain or what we think is stain, or maybe it's decay starting in the occlusal surface of a tooth or in the pit or the fissure itself. And you really don't know. You take an Explorer, it doesn't stick. You see an area that may be decalcified, but do you open it, or is it just maybe hypocalcification in that area? So you're not quite sure. And then fortunately, I discovered and I've tried so many of these devices, but I found something that's FDA approved, relatively new, and was well researched out at Stony Brook, State University of New York in Stony Brook, by a well-known researcher, Israel Kleinberg, who just recently retired after 45 at the age of, I believe, 90. So God bless him, he had a good run. But the device is called the Ortec ECD. ECD stands for electronic caries detection. Easy, simple to use, very cost effective. ROI is quick on it, but more important, it's good for the patient.
One thing I think that's kind of interesting with all caries detection devices is to really understand what in fact it's detecting. So there's some that detect demineralization, some porphyrins, some look at the bacteria or the activity of the bacteria in a specific area. This device is interesting because apparently in carious lesions, there's fluid conductance. And if you can identify the fact that fluid is being conducted through the dentin of the tooth, then we know that there's caries. And the Ortec ECD does in fact just do that, correct?
It's absolutely exact. You pretty much simplified what it does. We know that enamel is not a particularly good conductor, right? It's got calcium and phosphate in it, so it's not going to conduct. The dentin, on the other hand, is an excellent conductor. Why? We've got these tubules that are filled with fluid, and the fluid is a great conductive medium. So if you go into a fissure, let's say, and you apply this little probe, which is really a very, very, very tiny little probe that is single patient use, and you apply that and you get a low reading. And by the way, the unit, while it looks like an apex locator, does give you an audible and digital readout. What that reading is giving you, if there is just plain enamel and there's no enamel dentin breach, then you're not going to get any fluid. So it's measuring the conductivity of the fluid. If you get a little microscopic breach of the dentin enamel junction and fluid is seeping through, all of a sudden the numbers are going to start to populate on your ECD device. If you get a larger cavitated breach, fully cavitated breach, then that number is going to rocket up. And then you're certainly going to pick up a handpiece and you're going to go and do a full-on restoration. So I've tried to create in my mind the levels at which I will entertain doing something for the patient. So for example, and picture in your mind, if you will, a little black dot or brown dot in a pit and fissure, what we call snake eyes sometimes, or across the mesodistal fossa, there's a dark line and you're not really sure. You take an Explorer first, you go through, make sure it's not any schmutz that's in there, but it's there. Now I'm going to thoroughly dry the tooth. I'm going to take my ECD probe and I'm going to go into that area. I'm going to mark a control first. I'm going to detect what looks to be sound enamel. And if I put the probe on sound enamel, obviously I'm going to get a 0 reading. So once I've established my control, Now I go into that little pit and fissure or right down in that fossa, and I'll go in there. And if I see a reading from 0 to 5, I'm going to mark it in my chart. But to be honest, I'm not going to violate the sound enamel at that point. In my mind, I will observe it. And if I'm going to see that patient again, hopefully within 6 months or so, I'll retest that area specifically as I would anyway. If I start to get a reading from 5, let's say from 6 rather to 10, now that's an instance where, okay, that means that breach is there. It's confirmed. I'm going to confirm it visually by using a fissurotomy burr by SS White. And I'm going to go into that fissurotomy, use that fissurotomy, explore that area. It's going to create beautifully divergent walls. If there's decay, I'm going to see it, and I may be able to complete my preparation just with a fissurotomy, or I may have to pick up, a 330, a 1557, whatever you use to do your cavity preparation. If, on the other hand, I see that area and that number starts going above 10, now I'm going to probably anesthetize the patient, and I'm going to go in with a conventional burr and do a conservative and slow cavity preparation.
So what you described is actually exactly how I use it. And one of my favorite ways to use it is to have it in the dental hygiene room, because I find it's easier to have these restorative, sealant, fissurotomy versus restoration decisions made before the patient's scheduled in my chair. So if it's something where my hygienist can seal the area, with air abrasion and moving forward with a conventional sealant, I want to know that versus her having the patient in the schedule and then saying, I really think you should open this up. And now we have confusion in our schedule. And obviously that's not good for the practice or the patient or for our reputation. So I think it helps me make a better decision very quickly. And it also allows me to kind of wrap my head around what I'm working with as far as a lesion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And let's not overlook the fact that these little probes are probably in the 98 to $1 range to use. They're single patient. The lip clip that goes on is a autoclavable piece that fits into the cord. And if you've got a bunch of them, it comes with 2 in the kit, I believe. And if you're using an apex locator, most of them have a lip clip. They're interchangeable, so it's the same thing. So you buy in packs of 20 these little probes. They're about $1 each, let's say. But in the kit and the instrument itself, you probably need to do about 10 lesions or less to have a full return on investment. And that's unbelievable, because theoretically, I could see you doing that in probably 2 weeks. And to me, this is a no-brainer in terms of an investment. And you mentioned in the hygiene room, that's because the hygienist can use this. This is not something that's invasive, where some state laws might prohibit that. Quite frankly, I believe that even expanded function duty assistants in certain instances in certain states will be able to use this. This is not an irreversible procedure, as is usually the overall guideline, but they can very easily go in and explore those with the probe and help make a decision.
I completely agree. And I think that the whole device itself is very reasonably priced. And I think it's definitely useful for any practice that sees children or adults or any patients that have high caries risk, which in my experience is pretty much any dental practice that's out there.
Yeah, you're right. And for pediatric patients, it's terrific. And once you explain, probably the most frightening part for a child is the clip that's going to go on their lip. But once you show them how innocuous it is by putting it on their lip, they sit there, they do this, they think it's sort of cool. I've even had them hold the unit in their hand so they can see what I'm measuring. Anytime you can involve those little 3-foot moving targets that we deal with, I think that's a blessing. It's better patient management.
I agree. And I think that patients appreciate technology. And I think that many patients appreciate technology that's going to offer an objective opinion on whether or not a tooth requires a restoration.
Yeah, and you know what? I haven't really been fooled at this point. I find it's pretty foolproof in the sense that sticking to the levels of which I make a decision, like I went over, It's a very cool device. It is high tech, simple to use. You're right. Patients love when they see a third party verifier, which is that machine, helping to make the diagnostic judgment. It's how many times have you and I held up an x-ray or displayed an x-ray of the patient and you see that decay over there, we say to them, and they shake their head and they have no clue what they're looking at. This is an audible and a numerical readout. I think they can relate to it. I mean, to me, this is a slam dunk.
I agree. And I think it's important to talk a little bit more about the science because
Okay.
this is a very accurate device.
It's got 100% 100% accuracy and 93% specificity, which is really, really high. In fact, it's better than a radiograph in some respects, especially in the areas we're describing, where your radiograph is in the neighborhood of about a 75% specificity for decay. And that's, I'm talking about the decay that has not fully gone into the D2, D3 layers of dentin, okay? So high specificity, easy to use, accurate, and you're not doing anything but measuring the actual organic fluid that has breached that line into the enamel. And once it's breaching into the enamel and it comes all the way up to the surface, that's when we actually see the decay. That's when we see a cavitated lesion.
And so I think it's important to mention that the range of scores that you can come up with are 0 to 100. And basically, as you're describing, anything 5 or 10 and above will most likely require a restoration because this is in fact identifying areas that have penetrated past the DEJ.
Absolutely correct. And if it's a 5 to 10 and I'm using fissurotomy, so then I'm probably going to put a flowable resin in. We have fabulous flowable resins now that are helping to heal the tooth. And you might want to even a sealant for that matter is really basically an unfilled or a filled resin, depending on which one you're using. You can use that or on up to regular packable composite restorative materials. So depending on how deep the lesion is. And I will tell you, I bill it out once I've cut that enamel. It's a class 1. It's a class 1. You 5 to 10 fissurotomy. I know there are some practices that'll bill it as a sealant. I'll go either way. I think that's up to you to make that determination.
But I think either way, this device is going to pay for itself very, very quickly. And I think it's also worth mentioning, it's rather small. It has a very small footprint. So it's not something that takes up a ton of space in the practice either.
No, not at all. You're probably about 4 inches high, 5 inches high, maybe by 3 or 4 inches wide. And it's probably 4 inches deep. So not at all. You can put it on the bracket table next to the patient, on the tray top in front of the patient. Or as I said, the little ones, I have them hold it. They like to participate, and we let them hold it.
That's always helpful too. I will tell you that any devices that will help me make better, more accurate decisions for my patients, especially when we have to go in surgically and remove tooth structure irreversibly, I think that it's really worth its weight in gold. So, Howard, thank you for sharing your expertise here. I think this is a device that's really useful.
Absolutely a pleasure. Always enjoy speaking with you and being with you, Pam. Stay well and stay healthy.
I feel the same way, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Bye.